Hey everybody, Shane Presley here, Rock Paper Podcast. Hey, I got a couple of big shows coming up I want to tell you all about. Starting off this summer, June 22nd, we're celebrating 5 years of Rock Paper Podcast at the 5th annual birthday show being held at Broadway Oyster Bar. Again, June 22nd. I'll be bringing along Amanda Fish Band, Tony Campanella Band, and Odds Laine. Music will start about 10. It's an $8 cover for that show. So come on out and join us for some great live music, plenty of cold drinks, and all kinds of delicious food from Broadway Oyster Bar. Also coming up Tuesday night on May 14th, I'll be out at Naked Vine for my singer-songwriter storytelling showcase featuring Karen Choi, Billy Crogan, and Tony Compton. That's a 7 o'clock start, $5 at the door. And we do that every second Tuesday of the month. But yeah, let me tell you about my friends over there at Naked Vine. They're always serving up the best wine, whiskey, tequila, and local craft beers. And you can come visit them in Chesterfield, Missouri for some great live local music on Thursday, May 16th. Phil and Carson of the Scandaleros will be out there. On May 17th, Friday night, Cree Rider Band and Gin Strings. And Saturday, May 18th, Find a Drive and Gin Strings. Double dose of Gin Strings this weekend down there, so come on by. You can find all this information and more on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, nakedvine.net. And also want to let you know about my friends over at Joseph Meyer Club. If you haven't checked it out yet, they have this great product. It's an aftershave. It's a foaming aftershave that I've been using, and I love it, and I think you will too. Head over to josephmeyerclub.com. Follow them on Facebook also. And when you enter RPPJMC20 at checkout, you can receive an exclusive 20% off of your purchase. And there's always free shipping, so keep that in mind. But again, RPPJMC20 at checkout at josephmeyerclub.com. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening. Hope to see you out at some of these shows coming up. And have a great day.
A podcast is kind of like it's like a radio show that's not on the radio. It's on the internet. Does that make sense? Uh-huh. Yeah. That's also like my mom. It makes it sound more confusing, doesn't it? It sounds like this.
This is Daniel W. Wright, a.k.a. Damn Right, and you're listening to Rock Paper Podcast.
Rock Paper Podcast. Rock Paper Podcast. Rock Paper Podcast, y'all.
Hey everybody, Shane Presley here, Rock Paper Podcast, coming to you from St. Louis, Missouri. Hanging out today with Daniel Wright. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Happy to be here.
This is cool, man. Anybody that's been following this show for I say it a lot, which is cool that it's still happening today. That we keep continuing to meet new people. But you're a guy I've been kind of following around a little bit through social media, and I've seen you at a bunch of shows, and we have some mutual friends, obviously, in the music community and things. But we never really had a conversation. We've in passing we've said hey, but like that's about it. So this is what's kind of cool about this show is it allows us to have this opportunity to sit down and get to know a little bit more about what you're up to and everything else. So and then for me, where instead of trying to scream over Brother Lee and the Leather Jackals or something like that, we can actually have a conversation and talk and in the comfort of your home here. So.
I'm happy to do this. I've been following Rock Paper Podcast for a while and been seeing a lot of bands who I look up to, a lot of bands who I respect doing this. So this is sort of like a little personal thing for myself to get on Rock Paper Podcast.
Oh, nice. Well, thank you. Thanks, man. Yeah. Like I said, I don't know a lot about Dan Wright. I do know that you've been. Like I said, Brother Lee's a mutual friend of ours. I know that you've done some stuff with him and some writing or some readings at some of their shows and different stuff. And So I've definitely seen your name a lot around in the community and stuff. But I guess take me back to the beginning though. Like, does Dan Wright? You grew up here in St. Louis, or moved to here? Or?
Yeah, I was born in Chicago, but I moved down here specifically to North County when I was 3 years old, like 87. And from there, I just basically spent, the next, 20 years or so living in North County, first Ferguson and then Florissant. Went to, school there, was, as with, a lot of artists, was, the sort of social outcast. I was the kid who always hid in the library. And, eventually just, when I was about 17 or so, kind of began going through, my punk phase, like, a lot of people do, and began just sort of learning about, just culture and scenes, and I began to feel just sort of dissatisfied that something like that wasn't happening in St. Louis. But in fairness, there was. It's just when you're, off in the county, that, St. Louis may as well be another planet, let alone just like a 20-minute drive.
Yeah.
But moved out to to South City in 2011, and have been having one hell of a time ever since. And the cool thing about the time that I moved in was that was around the time that a lot of other people were coming in, and it seemed like the scene that sort of exists right now, it just started like on the periphery or peripheral, about maybe 12 years ago. They were all just sort of, what I learned, especially with the STL Here and Now documentary that Neil Luke did, that they were all just people just sort of, performing in coffee shops, and their little edge of, literally the edge of, the suburbs of St. Louis on both sides. And then finally, we all sort of came to St. Louis, to the South City area, and just sort of met each other around sort of the same time period.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it was like, I don't know. It's been discussed a lot on this show and many others, but like, there's just like something really cool happening right now in St. Louis. Like, and it's been bubbling for several years, like you're saying. Like, but there's a lot of really special, talented people around town, and it's been really cool to kind of be a part of it all. Like, but yeah, that's kind of cool that, like you're saying, how you kind of all kind of moved in around the same time and then become friends and stuff.
Yeah.
Through.
Like for myself, I almost kind of like, granted on a lower key, sort of whatever, I almost kind of compare it to how Paris was in the 20s. That a lot of people just came here because, even people from out of town, in other states come to St. Louis because it's still cheap to live here. And artists always need like that sort of place where they can focus on their art. They don't have to worry about money so much. And St. Louis is probably one of those last sort of bastions of like a city that is an actual big city that, you can kind of feel free to do whatever, because we're sort of, in a sense, uncharted territory. Like, people know Nelly, people know Chuck Berry, people know a handful of artists, but they never really know just how deep the talent chart is in this city.
Yeah. Just like you were saying earlier, though, like, that's a lot of how I was, like, growing up. Also, like, I was getting into music a little bit and things, and a couple of my friends, like, started playing original music out and more into the, like, modern rock scene and stuff, and then started playing, like, down at Pops and like, but that was like all I really knew of, like, St. Louis music. I didn't really know all this existed. Like you're saying, I lived out in the county also. I lived out in St. Charles County. So like you're saying, St. Louis City was like forever, away from me.
Yeah.
And like, but as I started following those guys, and then like kind of the snowball grew. Like I started meeting more and more bands every time they played out, and they kind of started that networking. But I was completely unaware that anything was going on in St. Louis music besides, of course, like you're saying, like Nelly being on the radio and stuff.
Yeah.
It was kind of crazy, like, to think that, like, kind of moving into this and, like, not really having any idea what was going on, and then, like, kind of getting, like, it's just kind of naive, I guess. I was young, I didn't know any better, but, like, to, like, then deep dive into this and like now, you know, meet all these people. Like it's really, really cool. Like 700 something of these later, these podcasts. Yeah. But like I said, man, that was sort of how when I started doing those lists of like shows in town and stuff too. Like that's kind of been a real like nice marker for me to kind of document it all too, because when I started doing those, it was like everybody was saying there's nothing to do in St. Louis, and I'm like, oh, you guys are wrong. I'm gonna show you. I started putting these lists together. Just, you know, mainly it was Friday and Saturday, and at the time, and then it was like 3 or 4 or 5, whatever, and then all of a sudden, like as it kept growing, now I'm putting like 50, 60 shows on a Friday, Saturday night in town sometimes, and in the greater St. Louis area.
Well, and that's an amazing, that's a good problem for us to have, is that, you know, when spring and summer get going, because it seems like from like March 20th to Labor Day, there's always like 10 million things to do, and it's that great problem of like, oh shoot, such and such is playing down at the Heavy Anchor, but then this other band's going to be playing it off Broadway, but then there's this other band that's going to be playing, you know, wherever. So it's like, oh, like, and you only have so much money, so it's like, oh, well, could maybe this person get me in for free, and then I'll pay to go to this show, or maybe we can stick around, and then we, you know, you almost have to like strategically plan your weekends now to be like, you know, how much can we see as much as possible with maybe what little money we have.
Yeah, well, luckily most of them are like free. A lot of times there's a ton of free shows, or $5 or whatever. So like, I mean, and what's nice too is like for me, like I can usually I'll usually go to an early show and then wind up down on Broadway at you know and shut down Oyster Bar and stuff, and then they go music till at least 2. So that's a good way for me to kind of how I am able to catch as many shows as possible and stuff. At least I catch some of them, but yeah, man, that's like I said, it is definitely a good problem to have that we have that much music going on. But
well, I think last time I saw you was kind of similar circumstances where Laine from Mammoth Piano and I had kind of put together this Roaring Twenties show, which had just a plethora of amazing acts. And then right when I was done, I popped over to CB's because the Leather Jackals were going to be playing. I think it was the weekend of 420.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that was a fun. That was last time we ran into each other, and that was a fun night over there. And then I think I caught a little bit of that the Brother Lee show. I ended up going to Venice for a minute, and then I went to Oyster Bar for the late set with Sean Cannon over there. And
oh, nice.
So getting my weekend fill of all St. Louis music going around, and it was 420. Sean did like a 420 themed show, played all like these weed songs, and they did like Rick James, Mary Jane, and Afro Man, Because I Got High, and Smoked 2 Joints from Sublime, and like just like all these songs, and like that a lot of my never would have thought I would hear Sean Cannon's Voodoo Player singing, but it was a lot of fun, man. We had a real good time over there. I'm
curious, did they play a Reefer Man by Cab Calloway?
Not that I heard. I'm not sure what it was on the first set, but I caught all the second set, and I can't remember what all now there was on that, but there was some really good ones. They did the Gourds version of Gin and Juice, like the kind of a bluegrassy version. Yeah, it was a lot of fun too to hear that.
Oh yeah, I'm quite familiar with that.
Right, yeah. So, so tell me, you were talking about you being in school. You're kind of in the library and stuff. Was that when a lot of the writing started for you, or?
I mean, I've always sort of, been called towards like literature. I mean, again, being sort of an outcast, like I've always kind of been socially awkward, so don't really know how to talk to people, and an escape for me was always literature. I read these sort of like cheap, kid-friendly versions of classics that my mom would pick up for me, and just got to know like the sort of basic greats, Three Musketeers, King Arthur, Frankenstein, so on and so forth. But the writing, I think, really started when I got into high school, because it was the first time that, like, you know, I started to see people actually participating in the arts. There was a weirdly a kind, I don't want to say thriving, but the arts were very much encouraged in where I went to high school, which was McClure North. I had amazing teachers there who kind of pushed us all along, and looking back, it's weird how, like, that one little era of time that I went to that school has so many people who have IMDb pages.
Oh, yeah.
Because there were a lot of really great actors and actresses, painters, and poets and writers who all have had sort of varying degrees of success. But it really only happened once I saw that these thoughts I had weren't that out there. Because you being in the county is that if you have a thought that isn't a thought that a million other people have, that you kind of keep that thought to yourself because you don't want to be looked at as being the weird kid.
Right.
Unfortunately, I have no filter. And that sometimes got me, I've always said that, I'm kind of like a cross between Kramer and George from Seinfeld. Just, I fall ass backwards into trouble without even thinking about it. And I just sort of make the most of it. It's like, okay, that happened.
Right.
Larry David is my spirit animal. But also because of just like what my upbringing was, like, comedy also kind of played a part in that. And actually, one of the first comedians that I kind of gravitated to, even before Larry David, was you familiar at all with a comedian named Christopher Titus?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I was watching his show, like, back when it was on Fox, yeah. when you could actually find it, when it wasn't like switched around, because Fox was notorious for that. But like hearing that sort of narrative type sitcom kind of instilled in me like how I could write, how I could sort of tell something very dark and depressing under normal conditions and kind of make a joke out of it. And that sort of like kind of got me to do it. And by the time I moved out to South City, like my writing really sort of took off when like I'd started just being in like a bunch of bands, and I always wound up being the de facto songwriter just because I love writing lyrics. I didn't realize at the time, but I was basically writing my earliest poems, which were absolute shit. But everyone starts off somewhere.
Right.
But one day, just sort of the muse of making music just sort of left me. Just like I picked up my guitar one day, and I knew all the chords, and I knew what could go with what, but it's almost like that sort of extra magic of what makes a song was just not there anymore. And so instead, like, I thought, well, I have all these lyrics. I've always kind of preferred the writing part anyway. Screw it. And I just started turning a lot of it into poetry. And around that same time, I got an opportunity from Evan Solt, who at that time was the editor of 11 magazine. I ran into him and Paige Brubeck after they had done an RFT showcase Sleepy Kitty set, and I told him about this great band that I had seen at the Heavy Anchor the night before, and I said, 11 should really do something about him. Without blinking an eye, he goes, Dan, you do it. Give me 350 words by such and such a date, and we'll run it. And it was just as simple as that. And it was sort of like the dampers. Like, as soon as I started that, just there was no turning back. And that's kind of really when, like, the writing had been building from like the time I was a teenager up until that moment, but being given the verbal go-ahead was at that point pretty much all I needed, and I haven't looked back since.
Yeah, very cool, man. I sort of I can relate a little bit. Like, not, I don't know, I've obviously never been a published author in a magazine and and different things, but like but writing was always kind of there for me too. I did a little bit of writing, like poetry a little bit in high school and stuff. I started writing for the school paper. Mainly they kind of recruited me because like they were interviewing me a lot for different pull quotes and different things for some of these different things, because I was pretty heavily involved in our high school, and plus it was a small school, so we but anyway, so then my senior year I started writing for the paper, And so I've always kind of liked writing, and then I started writing a blog when I started really getting into music in St. Louis, and just trying to do like album review type of things, trying to help my friends out. And then I kind of got some attention for that, and then I started writing for this website that was like a radio station stuff, and they kind of wanted just some online content, and I was like, all right, I can do that. And so I started writing for them, and all that was going pretty well. But I know, it's like for me, I didn't know enough words to like describe a guitar solos and different things or whatever. How it makes me feel. I wanted more people just to listen to it, and at that time I started listening to a lot more podcasting, and that's where I could move into this more of an audio format. But so it's kind of cool to hear that you took that approach and just ran with it though. But for me, like, it's, like I said, music's always been more the front, and so that's where I kind of wanted to move in that direction. But it's great that Evan gave you that opportunity, man, and kind of help light that fire.
Well, yeah, and most of the sort of breaks that I've gotten in life, it's because like someone just made a lightning decision, which kind of says to me that, in a sense, like, you don't need sort of a board to make a decision. You just need one person who may be in kind of a position of power to just give you the ball. And it's like, here, let's see if you can run with it. And that sort of leap of faith is often what, lets people create great art, because if someone knows that, okay, I'm going to trust you. If you are a hardworking person, you're going to take that trust. You're going to try to make the best out of it.
Yeah, for sure, man. So, so you wrote for 11 for a while, then, I guess.
Yeah, from 2000. God is. I think 2013 to 2016 when they unfortunately had to shut doors.
Yeah. You and it was mainly talking about bands, or did you?
Yeah. Well, I had tried on my MySpace page, which shows you how far back it goes, to write about just great bands I saw that were based in North County, which at that time was a Circus Window, Men Working in Trees, Dino Fight, and maybe like one or two others, the Chaotix, and Central City Heroes, and so on and so forth, and maybe one or two others, but they were bands that were sort of doing their own thing, and a big gig for those bands would be to play Cicero's, provided they didn't pull their pay to play nonsense, and that was sort of a thing for a little bit, but I never really thought I could sort of make a living off of it. And when I got this opportunity, right around that time was when the bands who we all know and love now were just starting to rise through the ranks, and I was out at shows maybe 6 nights a week, just always wanting something to do. And I was working at City Museum at the time, so I always heard about stuff that was happening. And so I would, and also around that time was the time that the first iteration of Livery Company, which is now where St. Louis is, opened up, and they were sort of a beacon of light that everyone just seemed drawn to, in a sense. Because I had done open mics, and I had known Fred Friction and maybe like Ellen Cook and Laine and a few people, but I'd never really known the scene on the scope of what it is today. And that's the first place where I heard Old Souls Revival, where I got drunk with a bunch of the people who are now members of Traveling Sound Machine, of where I got to meet most of the people who are now in Sorry Scout, and obviously Miss Molly Sims and the Manis Brothers, and almost like every band in St. Louis at this point that traveled through the Livery. And I kept on looking around at a lot of the journalism at the time. No one was really covering these great bands. And I even tried submitting a few things to the RFT, which they didn't take. And I thought, well, I've been given a platform here, and I, as I was saying, wanted to prove to Evan that I could, run with the ball he gave me. So screw it, no one else is talking about these great bands I love. I'm going to write about these bands. And that just started, sort of the process. And at the time, my two biggest sort of literary idols in terms of journalism were Hunter Thompson and Lester Bangs. So I thought, I'm going to take their sort of style, modernize it, put my own inflection into it, and write about why these bands are so great. And, when I was told to write about, a show, it gets to be too objective and it takes the fun out of being at a show. So I decided to take a sort of gonzo-like approach and just write about what my experience is at that show. If someone spilled a beer on me, I was going to write about, someone spilling a beer on me. If someone was trying to talk into my ear while I was trying to listen to the music, I'm going to talk about that. Just stuff that would, when it appears on the page, you kind of get a sense of what that actual show in that one moment was like.
Yeah.
Which, some people do, but I feel like not enough are doing.
Mm-hmm. When do you start writing more your original stuff then? I mean, are you still, is that starting while you're writing about bands too?
Well, I already had a small collection of poems that I just sort of set aside. And in 2014, I published my first book, which was just a small little chapbook called Working Bohemians, Blues, and Other Poems. That was the stuff that, from a small period of 2009 to 2014 that I felt really strong about. At the time I was also writing sort of lyrics, but didn't really know what to do with it. Mm-hmm. And eventually I just sort of cobbled it all together and they became this small little thing of poems. And I put that out in, I think, July of 2014. And the response to it was positive enough that I started, just diving headfirst into writing poetry. I wrote my first attempt at a novel that fall. It took me 6 weeks to get through the first draft. And I was just, a machine at that point. And also at that point was when, after I put out the first book, was when I started to meet a lot of people who kind of became the sort of the current writer scene in St. Louis. Laine and R.C. Patterson, a gentleman named Hart LaCour, Aiko Sachida, Grace McGinnis, Sierra Lowe, Emily Rosen, and later, the people who are associated with Bad Jacket. But, that initial 5, sometimes 6 or 7 of myself, Denmark, RC, Hart, Aiko, Sierra, and Emily Rosen, we would all do open mic at Venice Cafe. And it would almost be sort of this weekly process of Tuesday, at least for me, was sort of the day off. And then Wednesdays then, there were 2 open mics. And this is now in 2015, so Livery had moved to the second location by this point. We would do extra open mic with Tracy Swigert at Shameless Grounds, which was great because you could just sort of say whatever you want. There was, the weirder the better was sort of, the idea they had there. And then that would be done by 10 o'clock. We would all get into a couple cars, drive down to Livery, the second iteration of Livery Company, which is the old Radio Cherokee building, and Fred Friction would have his open mic there. And that was almost sort of trial by fire, because by 10 o'clock at Livery, everyone's pretty well lit by that point.
Right.
They're about as lit as an Indian holiday. And, you all have, just this thing of a bunch of drunk, loud people all trying to talk over each other. And you don't have a guitar. So what do you do when you're given that spot and you just have your voice to try to talk over these loud, rowdy people? You say the most poetically wild stuff possible just to get their attention. Because a conversation with the drunk is probably one of the best literary tools you can have. Because you only got 15 seconds to get their attention. So you got to say something good and you got to make it count. Yeah. And that sort of made, at least for myself, and I think I can speak for those other writers, it's sort of the same process where, just the usual sort of poetic nonsense that you would write down just got chucked out the window. And it was almost sort of like the poetry of Charles Bukowski, where you get down to just the absolute heart of the matter, no bullshit, and you get to something that is real, something that is true, and that's what always is going to grab people's attention. That's why people love the bands that everyone's crazy about now, is because if you get right away from the smoke and mirrors, you get to something that is true, people are always going to resonate with that. People are always going to be drawn towards that. And I wound up writing at least about almost 200 pages worth of poetry in that time period from 2014 to 2017. And by the time I was ready to publish this manuscript, this underground literary zine called Bad Jacket had entered the picture, and I was publishing stuff through them in their magazine. And I asked them, well, would you ever consider publishing this manuscript? And they said, well, we don't publish anything that big, but if you could split it into thirds, because a chapbook is no more than 50 pages, we could maybe publish 3 different chapbooks of your poetry. And that's what became the Murder City Special trilogy, which was Murder City Special, which I released in September of 2017, Portrait, which was released in December 2017, and Death of the Ladies' Man, which was published in August of 2018, last year. And each one had sort of a particular theme. Firstly, I kind of cut out almost 75 pages worth of poetry, just the stuff that I wrote in the moment and it did well, but it didn't hold any substance. So I cut that all out, and I had enough for 3 different books. Murder City Special is just all about living that drunk South City life. Portrait is about the stuff that's very important to me. The title poem is a almost 10-page poem that's sort of a dedication to my mom, who had died 10 years prior. And Death of the Ladies' Man is all about just sort of these observations of the pitfalls and perils of dating in the 21st century, whilst having some of the sort of leftover stuff that didn't fit any of the first 2. Mm-hmm. And right after that was when I started to get to know some people from Kansas City who had their own publication called Spartan Press, and they were based out of Bell, Missouri, because there's actually this arts community called the Osage Arts Community, who give writers a sort of I'm trying to find the right word for it. I'm having a little bit of a brain fart, but they basically, you can go down there and sort of live a sort of artist life for a brief period and just focus on your writing for a little bit. Okay. I've not been able to do it, but just because I love my job too much to not take that much time off from it.
Like a retreat or something?
Sort of like that. There's... I'll probably think of the word 10 seconds after this interview's right. Over.
We'll overdouble, we'll drop it in there.
Yeah. But they loved my work as well as some of the other artists in St. Louis, and they love publishing Midwestern poets, because the problem with literature is that if you're not on a coast, it's almost like you don't matter. And I think that's true with a lot of art, unfortunately, which is their loss, because I've been seeing some of the truest art is coming out of the Midwest right now. Yeah. At least in my opinion, being down in Memphis, being up in Chicago, and over in Kansas City, I'm seeing more truth that would have been coming out of New York 50 or 60 years ago, or LA, but now it's coming out of the Midwest, because I think, nothing against those cities, God love them, but it's almost like there is too much noise for any one voice to sort of rise out of that right now. That the only truth is coming out of the Midwest, I think, at this point. And I think also that just Midwesterners have a predilection towards just being truthful, whether it pisses people off or not. You're not out to piss somebody off and fight them like a New Yorker, or just being sort of, oh, I don't care about you the way someone from LA would, but or just what those stereotypes are. But a Midwestern is like, yeah, thought that was shit, but you're still a good person. Whatever.
Well, you mentioned a couple of your friends, RC and stuff, and you all are putting on this party. Let's get into some of this. This will be a release of your latest book, right?
Yes, Rodeo of the Soul. Well, actually, all three of us are going to have books out for that. Denmark Laine has Thorazine Ice Cream Parlor. Black Magic is by R.C. Patterson. All three of the books are coming out by Spartan Press. They're available right now online, but we're going to have sort of like a big sort of launch party for them at Floodplain down on Cherokee Street, which is 3151 Cherokee. It's between Style House and Tower Taco.
Nice. Yeah, man. Along with you three artists, writers, we'll also have some live music, right?
Yes. We'll be backed up by a bunch of artists. Nick Gussman is going to be backing up Denmark Laine. Mumblebee, which is the project of Frankie Manis, is going to be backing me up. And local blues musician named Alana Harmon is going to be backing up R.C. Patterson.
Okay. So they're playing... So, like, how's that work?
Well, it's going to be like how... I've been performing a few times at Joe's Cafe, and Joe's Cafe's been having this thing where an artist will do two sets. At the beginning of the second set, they'll have a poet speak, and the musicians will just back them up, just play sort of like incidental music.
Right.
And I've done that twice. Once with Diesel Island, which I was trying so hard not to fanboy being on stage with a couple of the Bottle Rockets.
Yeah.
And the second time I did it was with Brotherly and the Leather Jackals, and I was even though those guys are my friends, I was trying hard not to freak out and be a fanboy, because I'm always going to be a fanboy at heart.
All those guys are. I've been the same way anytime I'm around those guys. Like they're rock stars to me, man. Even though they're my buddies, I still get a little. Part of me gets excited about hanging out with rock stars.
But they were performing this sort of incidental music behind me, and actually Denmark Laine is actually going to be performing with Beth Bambara, backing him up this coming Thursday at Joe's Cafe, and as well as two amazing sets from Beth Bambara, who never has an off night.
Yeah.
So they're going to be sort of backing us up while we have an actual Brian Geisen Dream Machine, because it's going to be called Dream Machine Poetry. We've been into that sort of idea that they had of any state that can be achieved chemically can be achieved naturally, and we're into sort of psychedelic ideas and things like that. So we're going to have it be sort of a full kind of experience.
Yeah. That sounds cool, man. So is there? So again, May 25th.
Yes.
At Floodplain.
Yes.
Is there a cover charge?
No cover.
No cover? Free night. Come on out. And
free night, free booze, free music, free poetry.
And you'll have books available?
Yes. That will be the one thing that will cost.
Right.
We'll have all of our current works along with selected things that we have done in the past.
Nice, man. That sounds like a lot of fun. I'm excited to come. Hopefully you can make it out there and check it out and see what it's all about. It sounds a little different than anything I've really been a part of. Especially I don't get to make it out to a lot of the open mics like you're talking about, or the our different poetry readings. So it's like it'd be fun for me personally to try something a little different too. Like I'm all about just to keep continuing it. I mean, that's why I do the show, getting to meet all kinds of people, getting to continue to expand and grow and stuff. So it'd be fun to come check it out, man.
Well, yeah, definitely come check it out. I mean, this is by no means sort of like the sort of high point of us, but it is sort of that sort of stepping into the next level of trying to go for something more, because we've been doing poetry now. Separately, we were doing it for a few years, but we've been running together now for about 5 years, and this is definitely sort of like a little bit of a landmark. And the great thing about doing this now is that it feels like everyone who we started out with has sort of like made their bones. So it's like, this is just, us kind of seeing what other people are doing and just sort of keeping up in our own way, if that makes sense.
Do you find like because like I always just really thought of like writing as more of an individual thing, and
it very much can be, and that's one of the sort of drawbacks from it is that, writer scenes are sometimes more difficult to get together because one of the great things about music is that you're inherently drawn towards performing in public, and you will meet, cool people more easily than being a writer and just sort of being off to your own thing. But because we chose to read our poetry and do all this stuff, like that sort of forced us out in public to where we met other people who were doing the same thing. And, I'm trying to find the right words for this. Like, we're at a point now where we have the legitimacy, and, I think we couldn't have really gotten to that point without finding each other all out. And a lot of that involves just sort of getting out there, because you could write the greatest thing in the world, be it a poem or a song or making a painting, but if you don't bring it out to the world, no one's ever going to know about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm guessing you find strength in numbers in as you all work together, like it's kind of helped make things grow faster and better, or
yeah, strength in numbers, as well as just sort of being able to sort of pull away and sort of do your own thing.
Right.
Because as with anything, nothing gets done on your own, but sometimes you do need that little moment to sort of say like, okay, how do I do this to where it's specifically mine?
Mm-hmm.
It's all about sort of finding that balance, that sweet spot.
Sure.
That, you can sort of grow as an individual while your art, hopefully gets better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you three, especially since on this show and stuff, the three of you together, do you find yourself being competitive with each other, like trying to outdo anybody or anything like that? Or
I think there is something to be said for that. I mean, the three of us are so different in our styles. Like, neither one of us could do what the other does, but I think there is that sort of friendly competitive nature where, and not just with the three of us, but like, one of my favorite songwriters in the city is Neil C. Luke. To me, he is probably one of the best songwriters to come around in a long time, and
one of the best dudes.
Oh God, yeah,
great guy.
I owe many a bad night that turned good to that man.
Yeah.
He's one of those people that just never lets you be down. Like,
right.
He's like, there's always something.
Yep.
And I got a lot of my work ethic from just hanging out with him for a couple years there. But I'll see that like, oh, that was a really good line he had in that Old Soul song, or Steve Lickenbrock from Traveling Sound Machine will show me something and I'm like, oh, that's really cool, and then I'll show them something and they'll kind of go with that. So it's always this sort of thing where, like, I think it's getting to the point where all scenes are kind of all pushing each other up, because no one's going to make it on their own. Mm-hmm. Like, if you had the choice of being Elvis or the Beatles, I would choose being a part of the Beatles, because at the very least, other people are going to know what you're going through, as opposed to just sort of being an island to yourself. Because, he may have been palling around with Johnny Cash and Carl Perkins, but those two had no idea what Elvis himself was actually going through with shit. But yeah, I think it's at a point to where we're all building each other up, and we're all kind of pushing each other along to where, it's almost kind of like the bar keeps on setting itself a little bit higher and a little bit higher. And it's not like straight across, like, obviously, because everyone comes from like different, avenues of life, that, what one person does, it doesn't necessarily, relate to what another person does. But, if they get inspired by it, and that forces that person to push themselves along, then, it just makes things better and better. And I'm kind of surprised that the bubble hasn't burst yet on St. Louis, because I feel at this point, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when someone kind of rises through the ranks, and people notice like, oh, there is something of value in this city.
Yeah, man, for sure. You mentioned earlier also about lyrics and songwriting and stuff a little bit, but like, is that something you've kind of explored in the past? And
yeah, I was in a lot of, well, not a lot of, like a few bands growing up, but none of them hardly ever made it past like a couple of gigs.
Yeah.
The most notable one was this sort of folk punk band I was a part of called Snow Frogs, which only lasted for about like a year or two. But yeah, we had a singular album that we recorded on an iPhone. We almost kind of did like Robert Johnson, where we just like kind of put it on a stool in the middle of the basement, hit record, and then 3 hours later we had enough material. But apart from that, I recorded a solo EP, just me and a guitar, about 2011, 2012. And the last thing I recorded was for this potential project, which unfortunately never took off, which is unfortunate because I felt that there could have been something there called The Violent Puppets, which you can find on Bandcamp. It was myself, Corey Perkins from Bounce House, and this gentleman named Louis Condolieri, who came from the Nelly School, and unfortunately it never got past that first EP, and it was sort of crunchy 90s guitar rock, basically, with me singing like Lou Reed, as I want to do. That's the best you can get out of me. Either that, or I'll just sing really deep in sort of an off-key blues voice.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking, because like hearing some of your stories and things, like a guy like Shel Silverstein comes to mind, like who obviously was, had tons of poetry and stuff, but also had songwriting credits and stuff too. So I think that was really cool how you could do both and be very successful and stuff with all that.
Yeah, it's been something that I've wanted to sort of dip back into, but things get so busy that it's all just about sort of finding the time to just sit down and try to come up with ideas for a song, because one of the great freedoms of poetry is that you don't necessarily have to rhyme, you just have to write about what's coming out of your heart in the moment. Sure. And I almost kind of in a sense it's almost like I forgot that discipline, and I kind of need to relearn that, but I'd be down for doing it again sometime, because I always had a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah. You do you have like any kind of like practices? Do you like push yourself to write something every day, or is there anything like that? And like,
I wish I could say I did, but like if I'm not, I am always thinking about it. Right. Like I'm either writing. If I'm not writing, I'm editing, and if I'm not doing the two of those, I'm thinking I'm almost like got just my radar out to just sort of think about like stuff to write about.
Right.
So it is almost like an all-encompassing thing that I'm just thinking about, like on a day-to-day basis. So.
Sure.
But I try to write at least 5 days a week. And if not, I go kind of into a little private panic about it.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way with this show. Like, I mean, I record a lot, but yeah, there's also behind the scenes is editing and all the other stuff I do. I don't edit much, but there is some of it. But that it's like if I don't record the show for a while, I do definitely get a little antsy and stuff. Just kind of just need that kind of creative release, to get out there and do something. And so I imagine it's probably the same for you for writing and stuff. If you feel like you gotta get these thoughts out there.
Well, yeah, and I've been trying to force myself to not drive myself crazy about that, because sometimes just the well's dry and you just sort of need to like stop what you're doing and walk away from it. William Burroughs said this thing: cheat your landlord if you can and must, but never cheat the muse. And I kind of abide by that philosophy. So there are days where just nothing's coming out, and on days like that where just my mind feels blank, it's like, okay, I'm just going to throw my hands up and just sort of enjoy myself that day, because the last thing you want to do is just beat yourself against a brick wall, because all you're going to do is make yourself bleed.
Yeah, man. Well, I feel like you got to live a little life to have something to write about too. So
exactly.
So it's very important to get out and go see that band, or go to have that life experience and stuff, so you can, even help you also be more relatable and everything else. Like because if you're writing about stuff that nobody knows about or whatever, then But yeah, man, that's for sure. Like I think the same thing with songwriting and stuff too. Like I think with those guys, like you can't sit there and just practice all the time. You got to go out and have something to write about and stuff.
Yeah.
But you were saying something earlier, maybe potentially going out on tour.
Yes. Last year I made a couple trips out to San Francisco, and I absolutely fell in love with the city. And I did a couple open mics out there, and they gave me a whole bunch of love. First time I went out there, I got a standing ovation for my work, which like the self-deprecating person voice, like in the back of my head, like just kind of stopped for a second and just said, "I got nothing." Like these people don't owe you that, but they're giving you it, so take it. This is your Rocky moment. Man. But last week I was out in Salina, Kansas. For a little writer retreat. Like there was this big sort of poetry thing happening through Spartan Press, and had an absolute blast of a time. And from that, I got a lot of opportunities, and I'm now kind of looking at in late September, early October, heading out to Kansas City, San Francisco, New York, Pittsburgh, and maybe a couple other towns, depending on how emails go. But yeah, I'm looking to take sort of like a week off work and just sort of hit up a lot of other towns, just to get my work out there and get the word about me going, because you can only do the same thing so many times before you have to do something else.
Sure.
But yeah, that's going to be hopefully in the coming months. I wanted to do it sooner, but unfortunately, his circumstances prevented it to where that wasn't the case.
Right. Yeah. You've made mention of Seinfeld, Larry David, and Titus, Rocky. We are surrounded by Jaws and Back to the Future and different movies and stuff. And would you ever want to get into something like that, writing TV or movies or anything?
When I was in college, I actually tried writing a movie with a friend, because I started out with script writing right around the same time that I was in my first couple of bands, but it just sort of never took off. The writing part of it was great, but when we had to get into the practical approach of like, okay, now how do we actually make this, it just sort of fell apart. But it would be something that I would love to do. It's just sort of like waiting for the right opportunity to come along. Like I took actually some of those things that I wrote in script form, turned them into short stories, and that's something that is sort of like on my radar right now, is writing a collection of short stories. But sometime down the road, I mean, writing is writing at the end of the day, and it comes in many forms. And because I started out doing it, I would love to revisit it. Yeah.
I think that's just like cool too, like a guy like Kevin Smith, that kind of can have that idea for Clerks, and then blew up into a giant career for him and stuff, but like very, very minimalist, low budget, kind of starting, and now he's doing all kinds of huge things.
Well, and that was kind of what inspired me and my friends to do it, because we looked at just how cheap Clerks was, and the fact that it was done on a handheld, and he basically just maxed out a bunch of credit cards to get the production to make the movie. Although I do not recommend doing that.
Right.
Even he doesn't.
Sure.
But that was just sort of a thing of like seeing how cheaply even Reservoir Dogs by Quentin Tarantino was. That it is literally the bulk of it. That almost could have been like a one-act play, pretty much, because it just takes place largely in the factory that they go into after the robbery goes awry. Like Tarantino and Kevin Smith were two big influences for myself when I was trying to script write, because they did dialogue in a way that was almost sort of poetic in its own sense, because just they knew the beats of language and how to make a line really hit the mark.
Yeah, Tarantino is like one of the guys that, like, you know, especially like Pulp Fiction and stuff. Like, I mean, some of the dialogue that he puts in there is like, I mean, just it's amazing, man. It's just some really well written. I mean, the whole scene, but the lines, especially, and then the way that, of course, that Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta like go back and forth with some of those lines and stuff. Like, and it's just like so good, man. He's one of my favorites for sure to watch.
Yeah. Well, and that's, I guess, the kind of stuff that I'm drawn to, is like the sort of stuff that makes something out of nothing. Like, you know, when I talk to people and people say there's nothing going on with their lives, I get a little disappointed, because there's always something happening. It's just a matter of how you view it. Like, you know, if, you know, Seinfeld could, you know, for example, take, you know, leaving a message on someone's machine and turn it into the most physically awkward thing you could ever possibly watch. You know, everything is happening in people's lives somehow, some way, that, you know, there's always something happening, and there's something beautiful and artistic about it, at least in my opinion. So, you know, that's sort of, you know, thing that I always kind of look for, is like those little, like, gaps in society where there is no real right or wrong answer. You just try to look as little awkward as possible.
Right. Yep. Well, that's pretty much where I'm at in life, just trying not to look awkward as possible.
Yeah.
You, well, so we got this party again, May 25th, 7 o'clock, free show. We got Dan, we got RC, and Denmark. And so come on out to that show again, a floodplain on Cherokee. And is it? I don't know. I haven't been over there. Is that like is it just an event space or a bar?
Yeah, it's basically sort of like an art gallery. Okay. It used to be Fort Gondo, and they've had a lot of really cool events there, like in the past couple years. And yeah, it's going to be just sort of a low key sort of thing. It's going to be 3 amazing poets, 3 amazing musicians, a bunch of great poetry for sale, and we're going to have about at least a cooler's worth of beer, if nothing else. So, whatever's left over from my birthday party.
Yeah, you. I know around town you're known as Daniel Wright a lot. Also, when did that get started? The nickname.
I tend to credit Ellen Cook with being the first one to call me Dan Wright, because when she had an open mic at Foam, which she would co-host with Laine Newbacher, and I think Fred Friction might have been a part of that at the time, she would always call me up to the stage saying, Dan Wright. And she was the one that just she was the first one I remember, you know, calling me that. And so I was kind of attributed to her. And since then, it just sort of took off as just sort of a thing that people call me.
Yeah, well, that's a good one for sure. Yeah. Is there like, that should be like, should market that though. It should be there. I mean, there should be like, we need some damn right, stickers or shirts or something.
Oh, believe me, the thought has crossed my mind.
But that's the next thing, merchandising.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, you know, I've gotten about as much cool publicity as possible. Like the cover for my second book is actually on the side of Livery 3 if you ever go in.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't been over there yet to Livery. So
the third iteration it's really cool. It's down on South Broadway, and you know, you can always rely on seeing at least a couple of friendly faces in there, and there's always a fun time to be had. Yeah,
I know they do a lot of great things for my friends. A lot of my friends play over there quite a bit. Between 2 jobs doing the show and everything else, I just don't have time to do all the fun things I want to get to do. But and you know, working in the industry, I'm working at Broadway Oyster Bar, so it's like it's hard to get out and make it to the bars whenever you're working in one. So but yeah, man, I definitely want to come check that out and see some of your work and hopefully pick up your latest book. Oh. Rodeo of the Soul. Yeah. So, is that going to be? Are you going to put that online afterwards?
Yeah. It's actually for sale online right now at Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. So you can pick up a copy right now if you don't want to wait till the 25th.
Do you have any locally around town?
Not as of yet. Like the 25th is just going to be sort of like the big release for it. And yeah, from there I'm just going to try to promote it as much as possible without being annoying. So,
well, hopefully I can help help you out with that and not be as annoying. But you can also follow Daniel W. Wright, writer on on Facebook.
Yes,
that's your official page.
Yeah, Daniel W. Wright writer page. That's my official thing. And hopefully by the end of this year, I'm going to have an actual website up. There's been a lot of things that I've been sort of looking into towards, adding to sort of marketing and advertising. That's, is something that you eventually have to look into when you get to a certain levels that, you do kind of have to be your own, manager, which I don't mind. I've already had, half a dozen conversations with myself this morning. So, so yeah, keep an eye out for a personal webpage coming up in the next few months or so. And till then, check me out on my official Facebook page and hit a like. And hopefully, I will see you at a reading soon.
Yeah, or coming to a town near you on tour, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, keep an eye out. Things happening. But yeah, Dan, I really appreciate you doing this, man. It's been really a lot of fun getting to know a little bit more about what you're up to. And But so I thank you for doing it, and let's do it again soon, man.
Oh, can't wait, man.
All right, thanks, buddy.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Rock Paper Podcast. Rock Paper Podcast.
Rock Paper Podcast.
Rock Paper Podcast.
Well, yeah, that was it.